The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
What's happening, everybody? A good morning to you. A new week begins. Here on Fantasy NBA Today. We're 1 week into the NBA season, which means things seem kind of crazy. And we're going to try to parse that, pull it apart, figure out what actually sticks, what doesn't. We're going to be talking to Alex Rikleen on the show, going over a lot of those kind of weird early round stuff so far. Guys drafted super early that have not been panning out over the first week. Guys drafted a little bit later that are going crazy. What does that mean from a buy low and a sell high perspective? It's something that I wanted to do more of last year, but just like there's only so much of that you can do when just sort of yelling into the void to yourself and when you're needing to cover all of the box scores. But luckily this year, we have a second podcast for that here at Hoop Ball. It's called the Box Score Breakdown. I hope you guys have checked it out already. Neil and Adrian taking care of business over on that show. However, it is Monday, so we are going to go reverse chronological lightning round, which I will explain momentarily as well, and take a look at what's coming up on Monday night. I am Dan Bespris at Dan Bespris, DANBESBRIS. I know, it's weird, but if you can spell it, you can find me. BESBRIS on Twitter. Please send me a note. Let me know you found me. This is Fantasy NBA Today. You can certainly check that out. Subscribe if you like it. Leave a review if you like it. Or don't, I guess. Also an option. Hoop-ball.com is the website and all that good stuff. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the show as well. Here's what's coming up on today's podcast. I mentioned the reverse chronological lightning round. For those uninitiated, that is when we look at Friday, Saturday, and Sunday box scores in the opposite order to when they happened. Meaning we're just going to work our way from Sunday night to Friday afternoon, West Coast time. And basically, because things that happen on Sunday sometimes nullify things that happened on Friday, we'll be able to cover every team, all 30 clubs, and get you up to date and ready to go for the week ahead. Also, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking to Alex Rikleen about strangers in the top 10, top picks that are not panning out. We're going to go over the in-season premium stuff, and we're going to take a look at what's coming up on Monday evening. And that will be the order in which we do all of these good things as well. So, without further ado, Sunday, let's work our way backwards. Now, we don't necessarily start and do the evening games all the way to the morning games, but we can, I suppose, if you guys want. Houston at the Clippers. That was the last game to go final last night. Again, this is going to be a very quick, we're not deep diving these things. This is just me covering what happened over the weekend so that everybody is basically up to date with the comings and goings of the fantasy NBA landscape. For the Clippers, we told you that Boban was not going to stick. He's already stopped sticking. Montrezl Harrell went for 17 and 10. He might disappear in the next one. Not a big fan of the Clippers' front court. I think there's too many moving pieces there. Almost the same deal with the backcourt. I've been pretty high on Patrick Beverley to this point. I didn't like the fact that he didn't get into the game in the fourth quarter. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander played well late in this game. Didn't do enough really from a fantasy perspective to get big time involved, but he did take 7 minutes away from Beverley that probably could have catapulted him into some sort of fantasy stuff. I'm still hanging on to Bev because his game is rebounds, assists, and steals from the point guard spot, and he got 4 steals yesterday. But he is inching towards the waiver wire, and I need to see him get up into that 27 to 30 minute range, prove that he's truly healthy, and then I'll feel a whole lot better about it. Avery Bradley, meanwhile, is a drop. With Chris Paul suspended, and we'll talk about that with Alex as well, the Lakers-Rockets fight, Eric Gordon stepped up, and that's basically it. That's what happened last year. Warned you guys about PJ Tucker also, that he comes and goes as he pleases, and he was awful. Awful in this ball game. Nuggets held off the Warriors 100-98. One thing we were watching in this game was who would pick up for Will Barton, who got injured earlier in the weekend, and the answer was nobody, really. Trey Lyles got a couple extra minutes but didn't do anything with them. This was basically Gary Harris and Nikola Jokic. Jamal Murray was dealing with a leg thing. It seemed to humble him a little bit. He played 26 minutes in the ball game, but he went 0 for 9, so clearly not right, and he's a little bit of a buy low right now. Warriors front court, you got a little bit more Kevon Looney in this ball game and a little bit less Damian Jones, and no Jordan Bell. I told you guys not to trust the Warriors centers either. It's just, you get a feel for these things. When you watch something happen enough, you're like, look, this is going to alternate. And you're going to play one guy, and that guy's going to go quiet. And then by the time you play the next guy, then it's going to go back to the dude you played to begin with. Moving along. Sacramento beat Oklahoma City in Oklahoma, 131-120. Iman Shumpert had 26 points. I'm not buying it. Nemanja Bjelica had 12 points, 3 steals and a block on only 6 shots, a usage rate of 9 in his 31 minutes on the floor. That's not going to hold water unless he really can get you 3 to 4 defensive stats a night. And I don't think he will. I know there's a no kings allowed policy in general, but they are playing the young guys big minutes, so maybe we'll take the sign down a little bit. De'Aaron Fox looks like he's going to be doing enough. He had a big ball game, 22-10. Still don't fully know what's going on with the rest of these guys. Buddy Hield only played 23 minutes. Willie Cauley-Stein, 22. Marvin Bagley, 24. Bogdan Bogdanovic still on the shelf, so that's going to change things a little bit as well. Keep an eye on it. Over on the Oklahoma City side, the only thing we were curious about with Westbrook coming back was, would Dennis Schroeder still play enough to have some fantasy value? And the answer seems to be sort of a soft yes. He played 32 minutes, went for 14 and 8, had a couple of three-pointers. I think maybe you're looking at a top 100 kind of guy with Westbrook back in the mix, but you had your 1 to 2 games of fun with Russ out, and now he's going to settle back into a much quieter role. Atlanta beat Cleveland by 22 in Cleveland. This augurs poorly for the Cavaliers. They just can't defend right now, which, they tried to pin some of that on LeBron, but a lot of these guys aren't defending particularly well. George Hill bounced back with 16 points, 3 assists, a steal on 7 out of 9 shooting. Also had a couple of three-pointers, only 1 turnover, so that was a decent ball game. Good to see one of my old men get back in the right column. Rodney Hood is definitely inching his way towards a drop. He doesn't do much anyway, and if he's only scoring 13 points a game, I don't see the need there. He's splitting his time with Jordan Clarkson. They're both sort of gunning away. Larry Nance Jr. made his return from injury, had 9, 4, and 4. I think he'll continue to play his way into fantasy value, but give it a little bit of time while he shakes the rust off and removes the minutes restriction. Cedi Osman, who'd been one of the hottest pickups, slowed a bit in this ballgame. 12 points, 3 boards, 4 assists, a steal, and a block. 5 turnovers is really what sunk his ballgame. He's a strong hold, seeing plenty of opportunity on that team. He'll bounce back. I don't know if it'll be the next one, but it will be soon. Meanwhile, Trae Young, monster of a game, 35 and 11. I did not see this coming this early in the season. Things are going to even out for Trae Young. Make no mistake, he's off to a blistering start inside the top 30. That's probably not going to hold the entire season, and I don't think I'm going out on a limb on saying it. His 46% shooting probably will not hold for the entire season either. Otherwise, on the Atlanta Hawks, Alex Len, solid ball game. Of course, his value will go into the toilet when Dedmon and Collins come back. Bazemore was good. Taurean Prince slowed down a little bit. You got a pretty good feel for these things. Jeremy Lin was someone that I had hoped would see more playing time, but he just doesn't look right, and so I think you can go ahead and punt on that one. Turning the clock back to Saturday as we work our way through the next 22 teams. The Lakers, now with Rondo and Ingram out. Rajon Rondo actually playing really well so far. Same with JaVale McGee. Lonzo Ball looking like he's starting to get his legs back. Lakers, not a team that I've tried to grab a lot of guys on, but I think Josh Hart is worth using. Lonzo Ball worth using. LeBron, JaVale McGee. I'm not sold on Kyle Kuzma as a fantasy asset, and certainly with the ejections here and suspensions, Rondo and Ingram, you throw them on your bench for a couple of days. Portland, San Antonio, the Blazers playing relatively well at home here to start the year. They're a fairly predictable bunch. We saw Zach Collins going flying off of waiver wires after he had that big game against the Lakers. Well, he got outplayed by Nurkic in this one, and that's going to be going back and forth throughout the year. Nurkic probably going to win the lion's share of the minutes at that spot most of the games. And so for that reason, I don't think that Collins is a guy you can trust on a night-to-night basis. He's certainly not going to go 4 for 5 with 2 3-pointers every night. And without a bunch of blocks, I'm not feeling it. Same issue we've seen in other places. The big men are just not playing 30 minutes in the NBA these days. For the Spurs, you saw Bryn Forbes kind of get going for a couple of games. It's all three-pointers for him right now. So if you need that, you could give him a look. I'm not personally all that excited about it, but he does have a little bit of shelf life here if he's the guy that's going to take over the point guard spot. It seems like he's outplaying Patty Mills, but of course, as soon as you bank on that, then Mills is going to play 30 minutes and Forbes is going to get 18 in the next ball game. We already talked about Denver. Phoenix got whomped by the Nuggets over the weekend, and everybody pretty much stunk. DeAndre Ayton was terrible. Devin Booker made 25 points. He took 17 free throws, which certainly helped the cause, but 6 turnovers. I mean, you guys know me on Devin Booker. I think he's a guy that's going to consistently go early because he scores so effortlessly, but his percentages, or his field goal percent, has never been that good. His assist-to-turnover ratio is not that good. He doesn't steal the ball very much. I'm not sold on him. I actually kind of like Isaiah Cannon as a fill-in point guard for this club because they don't seem like they want to play the young point guards yet. You could probably milk Cannon a little bit. He was one of the few guys to have an okay game while Phoenix was getting blasted in that one. Dallas, led by DeAndre Jordan these days, and J.J. Barea beat the Timberwolves 140-136. Luka Doncic had 26 in this ballgame. That was pretty good. Dwight Powell is on a ridiculous low minutes mission. Nope, don't trust it. Dennis Smith Jr. still don't much care for it. Dorian Finney-Smith, I don't trust that either. Wesley Matthews hasn't been able to shoot at all so far, but somehow he's kind of hanging on a little bit. And obviously this one missed a couple of free throws, and that tanked his game. But 19 points, 4 3-pointers. He'll usually get you a steal. He might actually be worth owning. Wesley Matthews, old man squad guy for Team Dan Bespris. And I think he might be getting overlooked in a few leagues. I'm not seeing him owned almost anywhere. He's never going to be a good field goal percentage guy, but he's also not going to be at like 35%. That's going to come up closer to 40. And if the steals come, then he just rockets into the top 100. Real easy like. J.J. Barea, do we trust him to put up 10 assists in 22 minutes a game? Yeah, you could ride it. As long as the Mavs are playing at this type of pace, screw it. Give it a roll of the dice. Derrick Rose had 28 points in 32 minutes for the Timberwolves, and no, you're not trusting that. You shouldn't. He might have a couple of good games, but it's going to evaporate fast, and he's probably going to get hurt. Charlotte beat Miami 113-112. Good to see Jeremy Lamb come up with 7 cash counters in this one. 2 threes, 3 steals, 2 blocks. He's back on the good side of the ledger. Marvin Williams, 3 blocks and a couple of 3-pointers. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist had 7 blocks in that ball game, but he's probably not a guy that you're starting on a day-to-day basis. Malik Monk is all 3-pointers. We hoped that maybe there'd be a little bit more, but probably not. I think you can hold on to him right now because he's sort of the equal of a few other 3-point shooters out there. But if you see somebody with massive upside, I think he's the guy that you consider cutting from the dudes on this Charlotte team. I'm still excited about what Marvin Williams can do as he settles into his traditional 9-cat stuff. And Kemba looks freed this year with no Dwight Howard around. That's sweet. On the Miami side, Rodney McGruder. He's going to be hot, most likely, until Winslow, Johnson, Ellington, and Waiters come back. And then things are going to get really crowded in Miami. So I'm not advising you load up on Heat assets, but if you have confirmation that all of those 4 guys are still out, then I think you can drop Magruder in and enjoy that ball game. But you really got to be tight to the news desk. Tight to the news desk, because if you find out a bunch of those dudes are coming back, I don't think I'd play any of my Heat that night just to figure out where the hell everybody's going to go, who's going to get the minutes, who's going to get the shots. Detroit over Chicago. Reggie Jackson's actually played pretty well so far. He's hitting more 3-pointers. He might be worth using. Maybe he can find his way towards the top 100. Problem is that he doesn't do anything on the defensive side, and that really does limit a guy's fantasy value. But he's been worth holding so far, so give him a little bit of credit. Reggie Jackson is sitting at number 76 in 9-cat format. He's probably owned in a lot of leagues because he's a late-round guy that can get assists, but if he's not, I think you can give him a look and see what happens. When he's healthy, the Pistons are better. So there is that side of things. Reggie Bullock got into the mix, played his first game of the year, had 16 points and then a picket fence across the rest of his box score. 1 3, 1 rebound, 1 assist, 1 steal, 1 block. He's probably worth holding in 9-cat formats with the hope that he can get you some threes and steals. Again, kind of one of those late-round 3-and-D kind of guys. They are out there, and he's a good shooter. He got 13 shots up in this game. If they play at a nice pace, he'll do enough to be owned as well. For Chicago, again, a lot of guys on the shelf. Chris Dunn, Denzel Valentine, Lauri Markkanen. It's tough to get a real strong feel for this team besides, well, Zach LaVine. Bobby Portis is fairly well locked into a role right now. Justin Holiday playing well, but that could change when Dunn comes back. I wouldn't roll the dice on too many of the fringe Chicago Bulls guys simply because we really need to see what this team looks like, at least with Dunn in the mix. Playing the point guard spot, doing the ball handling, dishing. Does Justin Holiday still get into the mix? Can he really didn't take many shots. He's been extremely efficient so far. Can that actually hold steady? I'm not buying into it just yet, but if Holiday plays well, even with Dunn on the floor, then I think you give him a stronger look. Boston beat New York, but it was harder than expected. Give the Knicks credit. They battled their butts off in this thing, and Tim Hardaway Jr. looks really good so far this year, and his Cantor does as well. Trey Burke played 30 minutes, had 11 points, 9 assists, and 2 steals. He's definitely a roster guy in 9-cat. I think Mario Hezonja is a drop. I think we've seen enough. Kevin Knox missed this game, and Hezonja still only played 10 minutes. There's going to be some sort of head-butting that occurs, but, they're without Knox, they're without Courtney Lee. It's amazing to me that Hezonja still can't find his way onto the floor. But right now it's Cantor, Hardaway, and Burke for the Knicks. And for Boston, it's too many mouths to feed, man. Jason Tatum had the big ball game in this one. Horford was okay in his sort of Al Horfordjian sort of manner. Kyrie Irving, slow game. I mean, they win with defense, and then they have 8 guys that all can do stuff on offense, and that makes life pretty tough if your pace isn't ultra high from a fantasy standpoint. Orlando narrowly missed upsetting the 76ers. Vucevic, Nikola, triple-double in that ball game. He's going to roll along until they either trade him or shut him down. Evan Fournier had 31 points, a member of the Dan Besbris Old Man Squad. Good to see him get back on the right side of things. It's going to be an easy ADP for Evan Fournier because he just fell like a stone for no reason at all. He's a fantastic scorer that you were able to get around pick 100 in your leagues. That's an easy one. Jonathan Isaac played a little bit better, to 8.6 boards, 2 threes, 2 steals, and a block. If he gets you 3 defensive stats in a game, then you can pretty much put gravy on you can call that the gravy on whatever else he serves you. And the other stuff was okay in this game. The missed free throws definitely hurt a little bit. I think it would have been he would have looked like a better line had he not missed the 2 free throws, but this to me is more than enough reason to hang on. There's just very few guys out there that can do what he can do, and so to dump him for the kinds of free agents that are popping up, like a Reggie Bullock, is crazy, because Bullock is not an impact guy. He's a fill-out-your-roster guy. Isaac has the potential to be an impact guy. J.J. Redick, Joel Embiid, Dario Saric, Rob Covington all played well with Ben Simmons on the shelf on the Philadelphia side. Brooklyn, another nice game from Karis LeVert. He's playing really well here out of the shoot. He did go 8 for 9 in this ball game, which probably not going to shoot 89% for the season. He, to me, still remains a strong sell-high candidate, not because he's going to have a bad season, but because right now he is the buzziest of the hypiest names in the universe, and you could probably get somebody 3 to 4 rounds higher than where he's going to end up this year. Aim high, guys. Shoot the moon at this point. Try to trade Karis LeVert for like a top 30 guy and see what happens, because someone legitimately might bite with the amount of coverage that he's getting. Joe Harris, he's another late round, kind of 3-point specialist type, probably available in your league, although Rondae Hollis-Jefferson coming back in their next ball game. Very curious to see how that changes touches and minutes, because the big guys haven't really been doing much, and Rondae can provide the kind of steals, rebounds, scoring a little bit closer to the rim that the Nets haven't had. Jared Allen, by the way, finally coming back to earth a little bit. He'll be fine. He'll be fine, but you had to know that it wasn't going to be 17 and 12 with 4 blocks every night. Just, it doesn't work that way. D'Angelo Russell had one good game. Now he's back to one poor game. Spencer Dinwiddie is having issues with his shooting, but it still seems like he's the point guard they trust a little bit more, at least to sort of quietly run the offense. I do think he should be owned as well. On the Indiana side, 3 games, 3 blowouts. They're 2-1, and we just can't get a feel for who the hell is going to play for this team because the starters aren't getting into the fourth quarter. Victor Oladipo, I believe, starts the fourth quarter, so he tends to have the highest minutes, but the other starters were all in that 23 to 27-minute range, where if this game is closer, you probably see another 5 to 6 minutes for each of those guys. Miles Turner was serviceable in his 26 minutes. Darren Collison was actually very good in his 23 minutes, but would have liked to see him play another 5 or 6. Good percentages, didn't turn the ball over. This is what you were wanting from him. And then he couldn't get back out onto the floor. Thad Young got his steals, rebounding a little bit low right now for Thad. That's the one thing that I'd like to see come around. I'm less worried about him than everybody else is. I know that there's the whole writing on the wall thing with Thad Young, but he's one of their better defenders. And so to me, when they play a team where they actually might need to guard somebody, you may see a little bit more of him on the floor. Toronto, Washington. Toronto, pretty easy team to handicap. Valanciunas is going to be a big per-minute guy. You just hope that he can get to 22 minutes. He didn't in this game, but good numbers anyway. Kyle Lowry is shooting out of his mind to start the year. That'll settle back in a little bit. Serge Ibaka played well again. He's on one of his warm stretches. Fred VanVleet, fine numbers. To me, still better in real life than in fantasy. Pascal Siakam, 10-10 in this ballgame. He's another guy to me where there just needs to be a little bit more on the offensive side, but it's starting to come around. And, of course, the one name that we've been focused on is Danny Green, who went 1 for 9 in this ballgame. And we knew one of these games was coming, but 31 minutes. He's played 31, 32, and 33 minutes in his 3 games so far this year. I am all in, guys, on Danny Green playing 30-plus minutes per game. I think, personally, he plays better alongside his buddy Kawhi Leonard from San Antonio. But, I just missed a few shots in this one and didn't get the normal defensive stats, and so that's how it goes. You look at the body of work. Danny Green so far this year with 1 clunker and 2 really good games, that puts him in sort of solid, not quite elite category in 9-cat, but solid 9-cat value. He's still number 60 in 9-cat, despite the clunker of a game because of big threes, big defensive stats, and no turnovers. He has 1 turnover over 3 games so far this year. That is not nothing. It's something you have to pay attention to. For Washington, still no Dwight Howard, so everything is really clear as long as he is not on the floor. Let's go back to Friday and make sure we didn't miss anything before we wrap up our reverse chronological lightning round. The 19th. What happened on the 19th? A lot of teams played, and we've talked about most of them already. Clippers and Thunder we've covered. The Jazz are a really easy team to handicap, so really not a whole lot to talk about there other than the fact that Joe Ingles is just the greatest player in the universe. Milwaukee, the big man stuff is kooky. Ersan Ilyasova is a no. John Henson hit 2 3-pointers and blocked 3 shots. It's not going to be enough for him to be owned permanently, but it is going to be enough for him to cut into Brook Lopez. And that sucks if you drafted Brook Lopez because it seemed like he was going to be largely unchallenged. The Memphis Grizzlies, there's a lot of panic about Kyle Anderson. He's still dealing with an illness. He's still dealing with an injury, but he still had 5 defensive stats in that game. And I think as he works his way into better health, he's going to be a guy worth using. So either have patience or pick him up because people are dropping him already. His ownership is down into the low 80s. After being in the mid to high 90s to start the year. JaMychal Green injured for a while, and Jaren Jackson Jr. has a big ramp right out of the chute. This is way earlier than I thought they were going to turn him loose, but you can't predict injuries. JaMychal Green out long term, and Jaren Jackson Jr. is out ready to go nuts. So, congratulations. I didn't think it was going to be this fast. That's really all I can say. I figured he'd be okay, but I figured it would take a little bit of time. As it turns out, there's nothing standing in his way right now. I think that might be every team in the NBA. Are we missing anybody? Feel free to jump in, nobody, and let me know. But I think that's everyone. So there's your reverse chronological lightning round, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hop right into a conversation with the great Alex Rikleen about early round stuff. This is weird. This is weird stuff, but let's talk about it. So this is fun to say. return guest Alex Rikleen is back on the podcast. This is what I want to do with this season of Fantasy NBA Today. I am tired of lecturing myself. It's time to lecture other people. Subject them to the awful crap that comes out of my mouth. Alex, what's up, my man? Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Good to be back.
It is good to have you back, and I feel like we kind of have to start this segment. I'm going to tell everybody how they can find you in a minute, but the last time you were on the podcast, we were breaking down a mock draft, and you had some, what I will call, less than kind words for Dennis Smith Jr., and he's actually been okay for a couple of games this year. What say you? What say you, good sir?
I'm not worried about my prediction at all.
Yeah, it's we joked before going on air. It's actually kind of a sell high at top 100.
Yeah, I mean, you're the one who pointed out he's only had one turnover in each of his first two games. He's not going to be able to keep that up. That's definitely gonna increase. 13 to 19 points a game, 13 in one points, 19 in the other. That seems like the right range, but not enough rebounds, not enough. It's just, I still like him long term. It's nothing personal about Dennis Smith. He's not a top 100 fantasy asset at this point in his career.
Yeah, the big difference is year over year. Obviously, the turnover's down from 3 to 1, which feels somewhat unsustainable, and the free throw percent up from 69 to 80. That's something we should obviously keep an eye on as well. Shooting percent is exactly the same, 39.5 and then 39.4. But obviously, we're talking about 2 games. So anyway, that's not the point of all of this. You can find Alex on Twitter at Rikleen, just his last name, Rikleen. You host the Fast Breaks Fantasy Podcast. How's this short form podding going?
It's going all right. It's still experimenting with the new format, but I think people are reacting. I mean, it's a couple of people listen to it, more than just my extended family, so I can't complain yet.
That's right. All the positive reviews on Fantasy NBA Today come from my relatives across the country, so I know exactly what you're talking about. How can people find that stuff? Let's give me the shills here at the beginning before we get into the fantasy goodies.
I post everything on Twitter, so the easiest way to find me is Twitter. I write a lot for RotoWire. I've been doing the waiver wire. I will be doing the waiver wire articles both for Yahoo and for CBS this year, so you'll be able to see those on both those formats. And you can subscribe to the podcast, Fast Breaks Fantasy. It should be available on all formats. And if it's not, let me know, because last time I checked, it was available everywhere.
And if it's not, you will make sure that it is going
forward.
Yeah,
I'll fix that.
Yeah, perfect. So I want to do something a little bit different. These are segments that I didn't really get to do last year because there weren't really any other people on the pod. I had so many things trying to juggle. Now that my child is sleeping, other things can happen again on this show. It's kind of amazing how that works. And we're going to talk about really a lot of high-profile guys, which is sort of like the explanation for why it didn't really get covered last year was because it felt like it was kind of like sprinkles on the top of a cupcake, where you kind of have to have the cupcake before you can have the sprinkles. But now we can do both. And so my thought here is there are some guys, mostly like top 20 type guys, that have gotten off to really slow starts. There are a few that have gotten off to really good starts. And there are also a couple of guys from outside that ridiculously early stretch that have kind of slipped into the top 15, top 20. And we're just going to cover which of those guys, what's sustainable here, what's a buy low, what's a sell high, and generally Alex's thoughts on some of these key guys. So you ready to get started?
Sounds good.
I lied, actually. We got to talk about one other thing first.
I was going to say, I think you're missing one important thing for the fantasy community and basketball in general right now.
It's pretty awesome. Pretty awful and pretty awesome. I don't care which one you go. It's crazy. Lakers Rockets brawl, man. This is the first podcast we're doing since the fight heard round the world. Chris Paul, Rajon Rondo. It almost seemed inevitable that these two guys would be the ones to deck each other, and then surprise Brandon Ingram with lunging dragon punch got into the mix too. Thoughts on the whole incident, I guess, and then. I kind of feel like a lot of fantasy owners dodged a bullet. Those suspensions felt relatively low considering how big a fight it was.
I am shocked at how short those suspensions are. It's just one of the... I mean, The suspensions kind of feel very unfairly short, and I don't blame anyone around the league, any player who's looking around saying, if I had gotten into the same fight, they would have treated me worse. I honestly think Chris Paul in particular, they didn't want to overblow it because they don't want to knock him out of games. I really think the star power was influencing that. The fact that it's Rondo and Chris Paul is hilarious. It's these, the two people who are just so widely disliked but also both thought of as, really strong basketball minds and obnoxious basketball personalities.
Well said.
For 5 years, the two of them were fighting for the top spot for the annual assist title. So there's a lot more, things tying Rondo and Chris Paul together than at first appears. And so it's amazing that it's the two of them. And I just love the Twitter community breaking down the tape, analyzing all of the angles. Wobe was on it, and then we got the sideline footage, and it's just we had a lot of video to look through.
It reminded me distinctly of the Seinfeld the Keith Hernandez spit episode, I think was the one, right? Like Kramer's trying to dissect that there were two spitters, and it's a JFK, obviously It's a JFK reference, but then now we actually have spit happening twice. Was it a mouth guard? Was it a directed spit right in the face of Chris Paul? As someone myself who advised drafting Chris Paul in roto formats, because I thought that there is an expectation he's going to miss some games with nagging injuries, and I think that's definitely going to happen. But he was a guy that you're like, listen, if he plays the 62 games that everybody thinks he's going to play, he's going to be drafted at the right spot. Like drafting at 18 is about where he'd be with that. But if in a magical universe he gets up to like 68 or 70 games, you've got an end of the first round guy. I thought he was going to miss games. I didn't think this was going to be the reason why, and I feel insanely fortunate that it's only 2.
Yeah, incredibly fortunate at the length. And agreed. I mean, I think we talked about it when I was on last time that he was a very good draft day value.
So we saw game 1 for the Rockets without Chris Paul on Sunday night. It was, as expected, largely Aaron Gordon doing more. That's what happened last year when Paul was out. What do you make of the Lakers side? I mean, other than Lonzo Ball, which feels like the obvious point guard slot in, it kind of feels like just everybody has to chip in a little bit more because Ingram actually got the biggest suspension of all at 4 games.
Yeah, the Ingram suspension. I mean, it's so surprising. I think, I mean, you said exactly what it is. It's the biggest boost goes to Lonzo, but I still don't feel like we have a clear picture of what this Lakers team is. So I can't really, I don't want to say I know who else is going to step up or what's going on. I need more than a 3-game sample on this Lakers squad to have any sense of what on earth is going on here. It's a weird team and it's a weird group of skill players. I was doing some research before the draft, and I was looking at players who have averaged, I think it's 10 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists, or something like that. And there's a surprisingly small number of people who have met that threshold, or whatever the threshold was. It might have been 10-6-6. And Lonzo Ball, Lance Stevenson, Rajon Rondo, and LeBron James were all players who had done that, and they're now all on the Lakers. So there's this weird sort of overlap and not enough shooting, but I just don't think 3 games is enough to know. So yeah, it's obviously a boost to Lonzo, but beyond that, even with them having played that first game, I just don't know.
Yeah, and KCP so far has been fairly useless. I don't know that he's going to be able to do more. It seems like maybe you'll see more Beasley coming off the bench, but this is a team that, even as a pretty diehard Laker fan, as a pragmatic fantasy owner, I didn't really draft any Lakers because of how many weird playmakers and 2 deeps they have on that team. Obviously, LeBron James is going to be fine. I think Lonzo's going to end up being a really good fantasy player by the end of this year, but there was the Rondo thing hanging over it. Now, obviously, he's out for a couple of games, but I agree with you. I don't think it's worth dabbling too much. And by the time we figure it out, Ingram and Lonzo are going to be back. So
exactly. Exactly. I mean, it'll be interesting. I'm really glad we're going to get the data point of what happens when you take these two players out of the lineup. I think that will inform us going forward. But I don't think that we can. I think any fantasy advice we give would be more guess and less, actual analysis.
Yeah, well said. All right, so this is the stuff that I was calling the sprinkles. I'm going to get into it. Some of it's going to be pretty obvious. Some of it may be a little bit less so. But it's something that I think is worth covering because, we're a week into the season, and I checked out various forums, and people are panicking about certain things. And so we're just going to get an expert to tell us what we should do on all this stuff. Player number 1 on this list of what I'm going to call interesting guys doing interesting things is Giannis, who to this point has gotten off to one of the weirdest starts I can remember because in an 8-cat format, he's the most ridiculous monster that's floating around out there. And in a 9-cat format, he's not inside the top 100 because he has 7 turnovers per game through the Bucks' first 2 ball games, an 8 and a 6 burger. But he's also averaging 25.5 points, 16.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, and he's still shooting about just a shade under, but you figure that'll probably climb 50% from the field, and he's still not making his free throws. I feel like we're looking at roughly the same Giannis we've seen in years past. What does the trajectory look like for him? Are you at all concerned that he might... Obviously, I don't think you're concerned that he's going to be outside the top 100. That's an absurd notion. But is there any concern that, he still hasn't added the three-pointer, he still hasn't fixed his free throws? If the defensive stats peel off in any way, his value could actually drop pretty quickly. Are you at all worried that he could fall sort of towards the back end of the first round, or is this just a minor blip and actually maybe a little bit of a buy low?
I think it's more of a blip. I mean, you mentioned it. The defensive stats are key. He's averaging 1.0 steals, 1.0 blocks, whereas, a total of 2 stocks per game. He's been up in the 3 stocks per game over his last couple of seasons. So that fall off has had a huge impact here. If you were to bump up those averages to 1.5 and 1.5, he would already be in the top 8 in a, 8-cat punt free throw or 9-cat punt free throw punt turnover build. Top 8 overall. He would go from 130th to low 80s in the overall 9-cat just by playing with the defensive categories, and that's no change at all to the turnover volume. So I expect those to come back just because he's such a giant freak athlete and he's only getting bigger and stronger and more athletic. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me that his steals would drop off so much and that his blocks would drop off so much. The turnovers, I don't think do you expect the turnovers to stay that high? It seems a little.
No, I mean, the highest turnover guys in the league, who was it last year? It was Boogie, Harden, Westbrook. I mean, those were in the 4 to 5 range.
Right.
When was the last? I don't have this stat handy. I doubt you do either, but if you do, it'd be amazing. Do you know the last time anybody in the NBA averaged over 7 turnovers a game? I don't know if it's ever happened.
I'll give you an answer in a second. Let me talk about something else while I look.
That's incredible if you can find it that fast.
I'm already on the Basketball Reference. We're pulling it up.
Okay, so here's my follow-up then on that. He's a guy that should be targeted then because I think owners of Giannis are still thinking, listen, I've got my first-round guy. I'm not that worried about it. It's not a panic mode, so you're not going to be able to get him for like a second-rounder. But do you think someone could potentially go after Giannis with like a late first-rounder, like maybe an Oladipo or a Dame Lillard, or is that still kind of far-reaching?
I think it'll be tough to pull off, but I think it's doable, and I think it'll depend a lot on the format. I think that a move like that is impossible if you play on Yahoo, or not. Sorry, if you play on ESPN, because ESPN you don't see on your main page what that player is ranked overall. Whereas if you're playing on Yahoo, on your team page, it tells you that Giannis Antetokounmpo is in the outside of the top 100. And so I think it's a much easier trade to make in Yahoo where someone's looking at that really large number where they were expecting something in the single digits. Fantrax is similar to ESPN. I don't think you're going to get anywhere with that. You need a format where the host site is throwing it in the Giannis owner's face. To answer the turnover question, there have been 3 players ever who averaged more than 5 assists per game. None more than 6.
5 turnovers?
5 turnovers again. Yeah. Sorry, I think I said assists. Only 3 players ever have averaged more than 5 assists for a whole season. Kobe Bryant, and then both Harden and Westbrook during the insane MVP race.
I'll be damned. Well, there you go. So 7's probably not going to last is what we're getting out of this.
Probably not. So, I mean, there's certainly it's always worth trying.
Yeah.
It's always worth trying to buy low on something, but I think that outside of like a Yahoo format, people aren't going to have a lot of luck.
All right, let's jump to another guy who's gotten off to a little bit of a slow start, and that is Karl-Anthony Towns. His is not as pronounced as Giannis because there isn't one individual stat that's kind of sinking him on the overall sense where, with Cat, all of his stuff is decent. He just hasn't really gone crazy yet. He's number 30 in 9Cat. I've seen people freaking out about it a little bit, which is weird. I think I've seen more people freaked out about Cat than I have about Giannis, even though one is ranked 100 slots higher than the other. And I think it probably all circles back to the Jimmy Butler stuff, but I mean, I personally am crazy high on Karl-Anthony Towns. I would do anything right now to go get him. Where do you sit with Cat? Do you feel like this is something that's all going to blow over? Are you worried that Jimmy Butler is going to be in Minnesota too long? Because they're clearly a different team when he's on the floor than when he's not. Jimmy, that is.
So the thing about the Cat that's the Cat and his sort of struggles so far that's really weird is that it is when you look through game by game. So Jimmy Butler played the first 2 games. Jimmy Butler didn't play the 3rd game, but all 3 games have been very different in terms of sort of how they've gone. So in game 1, Butler's usage rating was 35%, and he took 23 shots. Butler dominated the team. In game 2, Butler's usage dropped to a pretty normal 22%, and he only attempted 12 shots. Game 3, he's not there. So Cat had an incredible game in game 3, and he was a little better in 2 than 1, but you would still look at it and say things aren't great. But I don't understand why. I understand Cat struggling in game 1 when Butler's just doing everything. But why is Cat not having a better game 2 when you look at everything else going on? And it makes me a little bit afraid that it's some of this mental, emotional, Butler thinking of these other players as soft, and maybe there being some basis for that. And I'm playing pop psychologist on a team that I haven't seen a full game of theirs yet. Just, there are way too many games. So I don't know for certain, but it feels to me as though there might be something to this almost mental aspect that almost Cat's like being intimidated by Butler being out there. It's early. I've seen parts of a Timberwolves game. I haven't seen the whole thing front start to finish, studying Cat and what's going on. So I'm really, there's some take it with a lot of salt pop psychology going on here. But when you look at the numbers, it's weird.
Yeah, it's very weird. It does seem like he's in his own head a little bit, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be fixed until Butler is actually gone. But at the same time, despite all of this sort of weird stuff, he's inside the top 30, which is like, okay, so if that's the basement for him, he's another guy where I'm thinking like, listen, if you had a pick towards the end of the first round and your guy is overperforming like now, Lillard being one of them, I think is probably the best example at this point because he was drafted around 10 and he's inside the top 10. Throw him out there.
I don't love the Lillard trade. I would not take that trade.
Oh, I'd love Cat. And this is the beauty of fantasy sports. It's amazing how this is like to look at the same stuff. And I'm just thinking like, if Cat is right, then it's just something in almost every category. And the spot where Lillard has this big advantage would be, I guess, threes, assists. Yeah, assists would probably be it, certainly in threes as well. I find those a little bit easier to get than the blocks with Cat, and just to have a big man that can do field goal percent and free throw percent. I'm less worried, I think, than most. But if you could get him for less than that, I would say do it also, right? Like, is there anybody, maybe a second rounder like a Kemba Walker, you could think about throwing out there?
So I think that the early point guards is a good place to look, but Lillard is the one that I would reject, or Lillard and Curry.
Curry for sure. No,
if you could turn Westbrook or Chris Paul or John Wall or Kyrie Irving, if you could turn any of those guys into Cat, I would absolutely say go for it. You're drawing the line above Lillard, and I'm drawing it below him.
Yeah, he's the barrier for both of us. I think that's that's the line. Well, you mentioned Kyrie Irving. He's another guy on this list of guys that should we or should we not be worried about. He's one where I actually fall a little bit more towards the maybe we should be a little bit worried side. Not because things aren't going to get better. He's not going to be a top 170 play this year. But there are 1,000 mouths to feed in Boston. He's eventually going to be the biggest mouth to feed on that team, but the other 7 aren't really going away. I'm a little worried that he's not going to be a top 15 guy like I think most people expected, and maybe you're looking at more at like a top 25, top 30. Where do you stand with Kyrie?
I mean, his field goal percentage is atrocious so far, and that should literally improve by 10%, maybe 15%.
Yeah, for sure.
And that improvement alone will really boost him up. As you said, there are a million very talented mouths to feed. The defense can't hone in on Kyrie like they have at other points in his career. There is no explanation other than small sample size for his field goal percentage going down this year. If I was going to be worried about Kyrie, it would be because of Terry Rozier and the fact that he was so good during the playoffs and the team is really trying to get him in. But even with playing Terry Rozier to close halves and all that, Kyrie is still averaging more than 32 minutes per game. So I really think that that a lot of what we're seeing right now is, with him being in a shooting slump, his field goal percentage is affected, his scoring is affected, and his threes are affected. And those are three important categories for him. So I'm not that worried. With Kyrie, I think you can't mention Kyrie in a fantasy podcast and not mention the fact that his last healthy season was when he was in 3rd grade playing for CYO. So if you want to hop off because of that, then that's fine. But I'm not worried about the number of mouths to feed.
Would you flip if you had a Kyle Lowry for Kyrie Irving situation? Which way would you go?
Depends on roto or head to head.
Okay, let's go 9-cat roto.
I would rather Lowry.
Interesting. Okay, so I think there is a little bit of it sounds to me like you and I agree where obviously Kyrie's not going to stay this bad, but maybe he doesn't quite get to that top 15 mark that people were hoping for. Am I summing you up pretty well?
Yeah, but I still think there's a lot of I think 15 to 20 is probably where I'm expecting him to settle.
All right, fair enough.
And with Lowry finally for the first time in his career ended last season relatively well. Mm-hmm. But for most of his career, the last couple weeks of the season have been both injured and bad. And so that's not great for head-to-head. So for head-to-head, I'd still prefer Kyrie. But in a season-long league where whatever, is going on with Lowry late in the season, is less significant, then I would take that.
If I'm a Kyle Lowry owner right now, I'm seeing if I can flip him for one of those Kemba, Chris Paul type guys, just in this moment, because he's right up with them, and he's shooting 61%, because that's probably not going to last. But let's talk about the other side of the coin here. Some of these early guys, we've mentioned some of the dudes that are underperforming the first week of the year. There are a couple that are overperforming, and one of them is you bleeping need me, Jimmy Butler, who's been insane in the 2 games he's played. What the hell's going on? Alex, by the way, we're talking to Alex Rikleen here. We got caught up in the fun, forgot to re-mention a name, Rikleen, if you want to follow him on Twitter. What the hell is going on with Jimmy Butler? I mean, is this this is the audition? He's the number 1 player in fantasy right now on a per-game basis, on the shoulders of 5.5 steals and blocks per game, 54% shooting, 94% at the free throw line. I mean, he's not going to be the number 1 guy, but what do you make of this?
I mean, the steals, the defense is really throwing him up a lot in the ranks. Chris Paul is the only player since 2005 who averaged more than 2.5 steals per game, and Butler's averaging 4. There's no way that this continues. Butler's a good defensive player, but there's no way this continues. So if you drop him down to a more sensible 2.5 steals and even give him 0.7, 0.8 blocks, he's at 1.5, as you said, but he's never done that in his career. There's no reason to think he'll keep it quite so high. If you drop those, then he falls to second in the ranks, far behind Anthony Davis, very close to the 3rd, 4th, 5th pack. So there's the defense is really, really pulling up his average. But this man does seem to be a little bit on a mission, and I have bumped him up my rest of season ranks.
Would you try to sell on him right now? Would you just hold on and see what might happen? I mean, what can you do in a situation like this? It's pretty weird.
It is. I would. Anytime you can sell someone not drafted in the first round for a first-round pick, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a good move. So if you can sell Butler for Lillard, for Kawhi, for one of those guys, I still think you do that. But whereas I had Butler a couple spots behind Oladipo and Paul George going into the season, I now have him above those 2.
Interesting. I really like that recommendation too, because the perfect sell high / buy low is the one that leaves a weird taste in your mouth. If it feels great when you're making the trade, then you've totally fleeced someone or something went awfully wrong. If you're selling high, you should be feeling a little bit gross as you propose the trade or as it gets accepted. Because right now, if someone's like, "Oh man, Kawhi Leonard, he's number 50, Jimmy Butler's number 1. How do I make myself propose this trade? How do I give up the guy who's 49 slots ahead of the other dude?" Well, it's because you're thinking long term. It's because you know that a body of work, Kawhi is a top 7 guy and Butler is more like a top 12. And there's weird stuff going on with Jimmy. He's missing games already. Where he goes, we don't know. That uncertainty. So, Alex, I love that. I love that advice. I think that's spot on.
I mean, you're exactly right about it. Sort of leaving almost a weird taste. In a couple of weeks, I'll write a players to trade away article, and penciled into that article every year is whatever the highest performing rookie is, because rookies inevitably, go through highs and lows. They have their slumps. And if you drafted this rookie and you're able to trade him away for a 5th or 6th round value, or if you drafted, Doncic and Ayton and you're able to get sort of a 3rd round value for them, that's what you wanted. That's what you were hoping to do when you drafted those players. And so, yeah, you've got this like joyous feeling of I got the right rookie. But at the same time, if you can like cash that in for, something more tangible and concrete, it's selling high on a stock. It's
Yep, you want it. You just want it to keep going. You want to keep cashing on it, but ultimately these things do run out of steam a little bit, and that is taking us to our final piece of this puzzle, which is, I think I can sort of affectionately call this, a couple of these names are not like the others, the top 10 in 9-category Roto on a per-game basis here after 1 week of action includes Smokin' Joe Ingles at number 3. We just mentioned Jimmy Butler at number 1. Jokic is number 4, although, again, he's a first-round guy. He's just sort of overplaying his spot. DeAndre Jordan at number 5. Niko Mirotic at number 8. Yes, as he was walking out of his house this morning, I waved to him and I congratulated him on being inside the top 10 in fantasy sports. Listen, I love Niko as much as the next guy. I'm also, as I said earlier, a fairly pragmatic fellow. Those names that I just said to you, Jokic, Ingles, we already talked about Butler, but Jordan and Mirotic, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that 3 of those 4 are probably sell highs for you right now, but what do you think? Can Jokic, does he have a shot at staying inside the top 3 once Ingles falls out? What's the plan with those 4 guys as of right now?
It's too early in the season for me to radically change my top 7. Or my top 8, I guess, is where I would draw that line. And I had Jokic at the low end of that top 8, but he was clearly in it. And so him being in the top 8 and maybe even moving up a couple of spots in that doesn't surprise me at all. I'm not willing to say he's definitely, top 4 the rest of the way, but I'm also not surprised that he's currently top 4. But we've got to be really careful when we look at these rankings this early in the season. Mm-hmm. DeAndre Jordan has made 7 out of 8 free throw attempts. What more do we need to show small sample size than DeAndre Jordan has made the majority of his free throw shots? I was doing some research on the last couple of years. After 15 days last season, Otto Porter and Evan Fournier were both top 12 guys. And Bebe, Lucas Nogueira,
oh my God,
was 21st overall. Remember those days?
I do, and actually, I wish I remembered them more. I may have mentioned this on an earlier podcast. I ran into Bebe in a supermarket in West Los Angeles.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I was like trying to place it. Okay, there's this 7-footer wandering around a supermarket filled with these like tiny people like me. And it took me a minute, and then I was like, okay, I heard him talking to his buddy, and it wasn't English. I'm thinking, okay, what is this? Is that like Spanish? No, it's not Spanish. Oh, crap, that's Portuguese.
Yeah.
Oh, crap, that's Bebe. And so then I was like trying to tweet at him to say, hey, man, like salmon's on sale if you want to get some.
That's funny.
Yeah, that was those were the days. Simpler times.
Yeah. After the first week, so we're about a week in. So that was after 15 days. So that's even farther. After a week last year, top 10, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. So it's early. The ranks don't mean a ton. It's great if you have Joe Ingles and Niko, and if you are capable of selling those guys for a player better than them when you drafted them, by all means do it. Especially with Mirotic. Mirotic is the one who I think it's actually the most positive. Because Mirotic, one of the reasons this is so surprising is because I think, myself included, a lot of people thought that he would be the third figure behind Julius Randle. And at 30 minutes per game, that's just not really a fair way of describing the situation. He might be, he is getting more run than Julius Randle, and he's so far at least the more important player, which indicates that we were all as a community too low on him. I'm still not putting him in my top 40 if I were to make a rest of season ranks right now, but he would jump a lot from where I had him during the draft.
So I'm looking at these guys, and Mirotic went probably just a hair before Ingles, or they're pretty close to the same general area. DeAndre Jordan, that one's depending on who's punting in your league, that's where he went.
Right.
It seems to me like if you could flip these guys for someone that is like a bona fide top 30, top 35 kind of guy, I think I would consider doing it. I don't know if I would go for like a top 45, because I do think there's a universe where, Joe Ingles and Mirotic end up inside the top 50, top 45. But I agree with you. Maybe you aim higher. Maybe my problem in this discussion is that I'm not aiming high enough. Maybe you should try to trade him for a top 25 guy and just see if anybody bites right now, and then back off as they don't and decide, listen, once I get outside the top 35, then it's just not worth me making this trade anymore.
So I don't know that you're going to be able to pull it off, but for Ingles, I think that you might be able to entertain a conversation with the Bradley Beal manager. I think that you might be able to entertain a conversation with the Chris Middleton manager. I think they're probably not going to really. I don't think those talks are going to go very far. But if you could turn Ingles into Bradley Beal, you would, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly enough, the Brewski 150 has Mirotic 3 slots ahead of Bradley Beal. Brewski had him at 38 this year in 9-cat roto. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, our boy Brew is very high on Niko, and that touches my heart because he knew how high I was on him last year. Ingles is below Bradley Beal, so that's definitely one you should consider. Ingles, and now that the season started, we can give this out because it's free at this point. Ingles was at 56 in the Brewski 150. Beal is at 41 and Mirotic at 38. So, yeah, these are guys you can target. Bledsoe, maybe another interesting guy to look at in that same vein, like kind of a small guy who can put up some stats and you've got a good base. Could you target a Marc Gasol who's gotten off to kind of a weird start? I think there's a way to make this work with these guys in the top 10 after a week where it will probably put a weird taste in your mouth because you're going to trade for somebody who's... Yeah, I'd love to have Gary Harris. That's a great example of someone in that window. And that, my good man, I think finishes out sort of this weird early season who does and who doesn't belong. Alex, thank you, my good man.
Thanks for having me. It was lovely.
He is Alex Rikleen. He's the man. He's got a fancy new microphone, and it sounds so good in my ears. at Rikleen on Twitter, Rikleen. He is the host of the Fast Break Fantasy Podcast. He is writing for Yahoo. He is writing for CBS and RotoWire. You can check it all out. Twitter's the best way to find him. Once again, Alex, a pleasure. And the coupon code ALEX still gets you $3 off. Goodies over at Hoopball. You get the in-season premium membership. Coupon code, once again, is just ALEX. We kept it simple. Tell Dennis Smith Jr. I said, what up?
I'll let him know, yeah.
Thanks, Alex.
Peace.
That was a fun segment. Something that I regret not being able to do last year. And I think we'll keep an eye on this type of stuff going forward. Just like things that are out of place. Do they settle into a place? It takes about a month for you to really know, to have a better idea of where guys are going to end up. Seth Klein, who we may talk to later this week, we got to make sure the schedules line up. If not this week, then probably next. I thought made a really good point on a podcast last year when he said, at a certain point, it doesn't matter where you drafted a guy anymore. At a certain point, a guy's value is a guy's value. And that's a hard hurdle for people to clear. Where, last year it was probably Miles Turner would be a great example of that. It's just a guy that drafted somewhere between 7 and 20 in basically every draft. And he was never really in that window. Like 3 games, he was great, and then injuries and whatever. But even in the middle of the season, I was offering top 30 guys to the Miles Turner owner in some of my leagues and unable to pry him away. It was like, look, he's not going to be the top 15 guy you drafted. He might be a top 30 guy. I'm willing to take that risk. But most people were like, I'm not going to trade my top 60 Miles Turner to you because I drafted him in the first or second round. That's fine, and that's an emotional part of this fantasy thing. But at a certain point, a guy's value is a guy's value. It doesn't matter where you drafted them. We're not at that point yet. Joe Ingles is awesome, but he's not a top 5 fantasy player for the entire season. He might go higher than where he was drafted. He might even go higher than the B150, which is pretty high on Joe Ingles, but he's not going to be top 5. Will he settle somewhere in between? Fine. After a month or a month and a half, maybe we'll have a better idea of that, and then you can understand what someone's value is, which is why this time of year is so critical for buying and selling players. If you have a different idea of where you think somebody's going to end up than the person you're trading with, you can probably exploit that. Or maybe it's not even exploitation. If it's just a difference of opinion on a guy, then maybe you're willing to buy on a dude that someone else is more willing to sell on. Maybe you have a guy on your team that you're like, you know what, I drafted this guy here, but I don't think he's actually going to hit that mark. Maybe somebody else still thinks he's got it. That's what this trading stuff comes down to. And among other things, because I sent out a bunch of tweets over the weekend, you also can't, when we say buy low and sell high, you can't skip steps, people. You have to climb the ladder. You can't take your guy you drafted at 60 who's playing well in Joe Ingles and offer him for a first-round pick because he's a first-round value after 1 week. There are gradations along the way. You have to try to trade Joe Ingles for a top 35 guy, and then you wait for your top 35 guy to get hot, and then you trade him for a top 20 guy, and then you wait for your top 20 guy to get hot, and then you trade him for a top 12 guy, and that's how you work your way towards the first round. It's not a one-step thing. 2-for-1s are not, here's 2 of my mid guys, give me a first rounder. It's here's 2 of my mid guys, give me a top 40. Here's a top 40 and a top 60, give me a top 30. You have to slowly work your way up. And what I wrote on Twitter that I'll repeat here is, you can't just turn a turd into a diamond. You have to turn the turd into like a rock, and then you turn the rock into bronze, and then you turn the bronze into silver, and so on and so forth. It's a 3 to 4 to 5 step thing to build your team into this top-heavy roster that wins shallower and standard leagues. Discussion for another day. Briefly here, because we're starting to run a little bit long, what's happening on Monday night, tonight, in the NBA? It's a pretty big card for a Monday. You got 9 games coming up. Boston, 12-point home favorites, or the Orlando Magic. I don't want any part of that ball game from a betting standpoint. Not doing a whole lot of wagering here in the early part of the year because things are so variable, but we'll look for little angles. Charlotte is in Toronto. Raptors favored by 9.5. I do have a slight lean to the Hornets on this thing. I think they're a better team than people give them credit for. Minnesota, 2-point home favorites to the Pacers. To me, this comes down to Jimmy Butler. I think this is going to be a really good ball game, so I think that line is pretty tight. Milwaukee, 11-point home favorites to the Knicks. I would slight lean to the Knicks just because that's a ton of points to lay for a Milwaukee team that's still trying to figure out how to play proper defense, although they did just annihilate somebody. Dallas by 5.5 over Chicago. Yeah, that's probably about right, although, again, Chris Dunn could be an issue. Utah, 10 points. They're laying at home to the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm not touching that ball game. Portland, very good at home. Washington catching 5 points on the road. Wizards have done a pretty good job of keeping games close, only to sort of soil themselves late, and this could be a similar look, so that's a good line. San Antonio by 1 in Los Angeles. That's probably a pretty good line, too. I might actually lean to the Lakers. I think the Lakers might get their first win of the year tonight against a slower-paced Spurs team, where if they can get out and run a little bit, and they can just sort of beat the Spurs down the floor, I think you're going to see San Antonio do almost no offensive rebounding in this game, and they're going to try to grind it to an excruciating halt. Lakers will miss Rondo and Ingram, though. Yeah, I liked this game. Maybe I should put it past tense as the Lakers' first win. Maybe not so much without Rondo. He's been surprisingly good for them so far. Warriors by 12.5 over the Phoenix Suns. This is the second half of a back-to-back for Golden State. But Phoenix is also not very good. So there you go. Not a whole lot of wagering here in the early going. I think probably the strongest leans would be Charlotte and New York, but I'm not betting on any of these games. Not this early. Things are still very dynamic. I like to get into the grind a little bit more. That, to me, is when you can find some better angles, when you start to have a better idea of truly what these teams are, who's on, who's not, things of that nature. In terms of the fantasy side, I think it's always good to go into a card like this and try to figure out what you're looking for on that night's slate. Orlando, for instance, we're going to be watching Jonathan Isaac, like a hawk. Like a hawk. Toronto, we still got Danny Green on our watch list. He's on our teams, but it's, Green Watch 2K18. Charlotte, I think you're looking at the Jeremy Lamb, Malik Monk, Marvin Williams, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist stuff, whatever that may be. Not a whole lot. Indiana, it's all the starters. Maybe they'll play a fourth quarter finally. New York, I think we're seeing things crystallize a little bit. We don't have to watch them as closely. It feels like, as I said, it's Enes Kanter, Tim Hardaway, and Trey Burke right now. And nobody else is fully surfaced. Milwaukee, big men, that's what we're looking at. Chicago, is Chris Dunn playing? What does that mean for everybody else? For Dallas, it's sort of the old versus new. That there isn't one thing we're watching with Dallas. Just we'll take a look at that box score at the end of the night. Utah, Memphis, Grizzlies, obviously Slow-Mo is the guy that everybody's watching on that team right now, and then Jaren Jackson. This will be an interesting test against a much better team that can actually defend a little bit in Utah, but he got loose in that last one and looked good. Washington, doesn't sound like Dwight Howard made the trip, so not much to look at there. Portland, I'm still hoping that Mo Harkless can do something. I'm holding out hope that he can get healthy. He's the guy I want to win that small forward job for the Portland Trailblazers, but he doesn't have it yet. San Antonio, LA, the Spurs, you'll see, I guess, if Bryn Forbes can kind of keep holding down the point guard spot for the Lakers. Does Lonzo Ball now step into this big role with Rondo out? I'm not that curious about Lakers fantasy stuff because those guys will be back in a couple of games, and then, again, there's just sort of too many things going on. And then with Phoenix, Isaiah Cannon, believe it or not, is the guy you're sort of watching right now because everybody else is fairly locked into a role, many of them not good enough to be rostered because of depth at the position. And Cannon is outplaying the young point guards, and he can make a lot of three-pointers, and he apparently is better with assist to turnover than Devin Booker. So you just have him bring it into the front court, start the offense, and maybe it'll loop back around to him for a three-pointer at some point. He might be worth using. He could give you that sort of top 90, top 100 stuff for however long they just let him roll. But it's not going to be awesome every night. Something to keep in mind with that Phoenix scene. It's just not going to be awesome every night. Okay, nice long podcast, as always. Boy, we're running long these days, but you guys seem to like it, so whatever. I'm Dan Vespers. Thanks again to Alex Rikleen for taking the time to break down some of the early round stuff this first week in the books. He, again, is at Rikleen on Twitter. The coupon code, I should say, is Alex. Hoop-ball.com is the website. Click on the premium tab, choose Go Premium, and then get our in-season membership. It's so awesome. It's so great. There's so many things you get. You get live video chats with the Hoopball pros every night. You get the premium written content every day. It's more. Here's the thing. It's just more than the premium stuff at other websites. We will do more for you. You have greater access to the pros so you can get more one-on-one. That's the real key for us. You get the one-on-one stuff, and we can talk about your individual teams. That's the in-season premium membership. Get it for $3 off. It's still $5 off its normal price just because, so you can actually get it for $8 off right now with the built-in discount and the $3 coupon code. And as I do at the end of every episode right now, I get down on bended knee, and I'm not going to sing like Brew did over the weekend. Please subscribe to Fantasy NBA Today. It means the world to us. And if you like the podcast, drop us a nice review. We appreciate those as well. Have a wonderful Monday, everybody. Tomorrow, Hoopball DFS expert Mike Apatria will come on. He's also good at the season-long stuff, but that'll be fun. We'll get into... We'll talk a little DFS on the pod. We don't do that very often, and probably because I don't fully understand it. Benny Aziz, Seth Klein likely coming up later in the week, and of course the great Aaron Brewski will wrap things up with us on Friday. Again, I said it once, I'll say it twice. Have a wonderful Monday. Enjoy the fantasy 9-game slate. Talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.